Hey everybody, my name's Joshua Palmentier and I am the founder of the small press Zombies Need Brains, and we produce science fiction and fantasy themed anthologies that we fund with a Kickstarter. So we've got a Kickstarter running right now for 4 new anthologies. And what we have here today are the editors for one of those called Artifice and Craft. And essentially the theme is basically magical artifacts. But David B. Coe and Edmund Schubert are here today to tell us more about the theme and what it is they're looking for in their stories, and basically just give you a rundown in case you're planning on writing something for this particular anthology. So let's start with the introductions here. Ed, why don't you start first and just tell us who you are, where we can find you, and then we'll move on to David.
There we go. Thanks. Appreciate it. Ed Schubert, mostly short stories, both writing. I've published about 50 or so, got 2 short story collections. The most recent, This Giant Leap, is one of the early backer incentives. So if you want to know the kinds of things that I like, read my stuff, because I like my stuff. I'll also say, if you want to submit to one of the other anthologies that Joshua is editing, I realized that my story Batting Out of Order, which was in one of the previous Zombies Need Brains anthologies, is also in there, and he bought that one. So if you want to get an idea of what he likes, you could take a peek at that too. So also spent 10 years editing IGMS online short stories, and I've also done some other things, managing editor of a magazine called Diversity Woman, a few other business magazines. It was an interesting experience too, but outside of the scope of this project, so we'll leave it at that.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Hi, I'm David Coe. I also write as D.B. Jackson. I have been writing fantasy for about a quarter of a century or more, and have written a couple of dozen books under both names. And I've also written about that number of short stories, including writing for Joshua. I've published close to 10 short stories at this point with Zombies Need Brains. And Artifice and Craft will, Kickstarter gods allowing, be my 5th anthology with Zombies Need Brains. And this time it's pretty special because I've always wanted to work with Ed. He has been a good friend for a long time, and the idea of working with him really, I think it's just going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it.
I agree, and I'm happy to sort of flip the script a little bit, because we've worked together not as co-editors, but you bought a short story from me from one of the other zombies, not the one that I mentioned. And also I've bought several stories from you when I was editing Intergalactic Medicine Show. So we've always had a little bit of a who's on first, what's on second. This is our first time doing this as both of us as editors together, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, what we're going to find is we disagree on everything, but that's okay. It'll be fine.
That's the whole point of having 2 editors. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I have, or I'd like to have 2 editors on all these projects, is because like Patricia and I started it out, but there'd be stories that I love that Patricia was just like, meh, and vice versa. And I feel like when you have that, it rounds out the anthology more. It gives the anthology a little more variety, and people are more likely to find things they love when you have 2 people working on it in the anthologies. So yeah, magical artifacts is extremely vague as a description for this theme. So why don't you guys, it doesn't matter who wants to start, why don't you guys expound on that and talk about what exactly the theme is supposed to be?
All right, if Ed doesn't mind, I'll go first. Yes.
Please. No, the floor is very yours.
So I'm going to start by saying I actually don't consider it magical artifacts.
Okay.
I consider it magical works of art, pieces of art. So a cursed painting, a novel with supernatural powers. Joshua, in our conversations, you've used the example of the portrait of Dorian Gray as kind of the piece of art that's spelled or magicked in some way. And I think that's a great example for it. And so the story that prospective writers ought to be thinking about would have that piece of supernatural art at its very core. It shouldn't be something that's tangential to another story. If you pull out that piece of spelled art, the entire story would collapse. That's the ideal. It should lie at the very heart of what you're trying to do with your narrative. And then after that, we're really, I mean, our standards are fairly low. We're looking for outstanding prose, characters who we will remember for years after reading the story, plot lines that keep us on the edge of our seat, and settings that just fire our imaginations. So aside from that, it's easy, I swear.
The complete package, that's all we're looking for.
Mistake. Oh my Lord.
So what would you have to add to that, Ed? Anything?
Well, so I would say that the obvious path is a fantasy story, and I expect that we're going to get a lot of those. And so I guess I want to say two things right off the top of my head. One is know what the obvious things are and don't do that. But also on the flip side, I've been doing this long enough that I've seen some people go so far out of their way to do something not obvious that they do something so garish and ridiculous that it can't possibly be pulled off. Don't be ridiculous in your efforts to do something different. And then the other thing that I wanted to add is that, like I said at the beginning here, fantasy is the obvious path into this sort of type of theme. And so I'm really hoping that some people will work to find a way to make a science fiction story. Will tell us a couple of stories that lean harder into the horror. I would like to see this book not be a fantasy only collection. So those are the two things off the top of my head.
Agreed. Yeah, I would second all of that. And also the idea that the obvious is not always the best path. The first idea that occurs to someone could very well be the first idea that occurs to 20 someone's. And so stretch yourself. But as Ed said, don't, if you have an idea that's just firing your imagination and it seems self-apparent to you, but that's the thing you want to write, then write it. Because if you're passionate about the story, that passion is going to come through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's certainly, you know, like, for example, I would expect a lot of people are probably thinking picture Dorian Gray painting stuff. And it's like, well, we can only have so many paintings, you know, enchanted paintings as the as stories in the anthologies. So, you know, don't go outside of the obvious. And I do want to emphasize the science fiction type of stories for this, because one of the things that Zombies always tries to do is get as much variety in our anthologies as possible. And so if you could come up with a good science fiction artifice or craft that would fit, then you're going to stand out in the slush pile, because we're probably not going to see very many sci-fi ones. So you're upping your chances if you can come up with something good there. Yeah. Let's switch it up a little bit and talk about things that you don't want to see. Like things that you don't feel fit the theme. Let's talk about that first, and then if there's anything that you know that you don't want, you know, like we don't want any zombie stories, or, you know, or things like that. If you have anything like that on your list, but let's talk about the theme first, though. What is the theme not supposed to be?
Well, it's not things. Nope. This is perfect. This is exactly how this whole book is going to be put together. Go, David. It's all you.
No, I was going to say I was leaving it to you. You go first.
Perfect. Well, as we were talking about earlier, you know, it's not about things that are used to create magical works of art. So, you know, if you've got a magical paintbrush, that's not a work of art. You might write a perfectly wonderful story about a magic paintbrush that does all sorts of extraordinary things, but it's not going to fit in with the theme of what we're looking for. And I can think of a variety of different, you know, sort of paths that somebody could come up with a really interesting story that just wouldn't be right for our anthology, about tools used to make things that are works of art in some way, shape, or form. And the one exception to that, I would say, is a magical instrument can be a work of art in and of itself, or it can be used to create the art of music. So is the song magical, you know, a la Mozart and his flute, or is the instrument, is it the instrument or the song? Might be some flexibility there.
Yeah.
Okay, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would add that my initial description focused too much on physical works of art. A magical song, something that exists only as sound, that works perfectly. We're fine with that. It doesn't have to be. I could imagine somebody doing something with a theatrical performance where the performance itself has some sort of magical quality. That would be perfect. It doesn't have to be an object. It doesn't have to be, and that's why I responded earlier to artifacts, because I didn't want it to be too closely tied to a physical object. Any act of creation that has magical qualities, or any act of creativity, I should say, that has magical qualities, I think qualifies.
And I really like the idea of a magical, of course, now we're going to get 57 stories about magical theater performances, but I think it's an intriguing idea. I like it.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting is the magical thing has to be what's being created. It's not what's being used to create it. It's the actual creation that's supposed to be magical.
Exactly. And so actually, now that we're talking about it, you used a musical instrument earlier as an example of what we're not looking for. And I think...
No, I say you could go either way with a musical instrument.
That too.
I said you could go either way. A musical instrument is the one thing that you could go either way with. Not a paintbrush, not a fountain pen, not a chisel for a statue, you know. With a story about the statue, not the chisel used to make it.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say with the paintbrush. I was going to say the paintbrush can't be magical. It's the painting that's supposed to be magical.
Right.
It's what is being created that's supposed to be magical here.
Yeah, okay. So a musical instrument kind of straddles the line a little bit, because if it's a 18th century Stradivarius, or probably have the century wrong, but if it's a Stradivarius, that is a work of art in and of itself, is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, then the story would probably be focused on the act of creating the Stradivarius, that you're creating the violin. So the story would not be, I have this violin and I'm playing it. The story would be, I am creating this violin, and the creation ends up being magical. Like the paintbrush. If you're creating the paintbrush, if you're finding like the like unicorn hair to put in the paintbrush to make the paintbrush magical, and the story is about creating the paintbrush, then
right. But I don't want to get too bogged down in that, because then you go back to Dorian Gray and it doesn't fit anymore, because Dorian Gray isn't about the creation of the painting, it's about the painting itself. So we're going to know it when we see it. It's going to be pornography. We're going to know it when we see it.
I'm also thinking about that musical instrument thing. I would love to see somebody turn something, inside out and, write me a story about a magical instrument, but the magical thing that it does is something besides music, Get real creative. What could you do with a magical instrument besides make music? That kind of thing would intrigue me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that's true though of any open call of anything, is that you know it when you see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you're reading it and you're just like, okay, this is just not on theme. It seems to have all of the trappings, but it wasn't exactly what we were thinking of in terms of theme. So yeah, I think this one's a little trickier theme than say some of our other anthologies. Like one's dragons. I mean, there's we don't have to get too tricky.
Pretty straightforward.
But yeah, so it's a little harder to get a hold of, but that's why we're doing this kind of interview video. So
and the dragons thing, I mean, it has to be from the dragon's point of view, right?
Yes, yep, that's the point there. But that's pretty easy to say. The story has to have, a significant portion from the dragon's point of view, and you can't really get too off of that without screwing it up. But I'm sure we're going to see a ton of stories where there's just a dragon in it somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's that. But so going back to Artifice and Craft, then anything that you're not looking for in the submission pile? It doesn't have to be like a theme-based thing, but like are you willing to accept Flash? Are you that kind of thing? Are there things that you're not willing to really look at? Poetry.
Right. Well, no, I mean, we're looking for short fiction.
Okay.
And I would say, just based on my experience editing other ZNB anthologies, if somebody writes us a really fantastic Flash story, I'm not going to say we're not going to buy it.
Yeah.
But I have found again and again that the level of narrative and character development that we tend to look for ZNB anthologies, it's really hard to get that across in 1,000 words or even 2,000 words. Most of the stories you and I have bought together or that I bought with other editors have been at least 4,000 words long, not because we're setting that as a yard mark, but just because that tends to be the length required to get the depth and richness in the stories that we want to find.
Yeah, that's certainly true on mine. I think the shortest story that Zombies has bought for one of our anthologies is like 1,500 words. I think it was the starfish story in the Where anthology, and it was like we read it and we're just like, there's nothing more to be said here. You can't add this. The story is what the story is, and it was great. And so yeah, shorter doesn't tend to be what we're interested in. But if you wow us with a short story, we're going to buy it. Yeah, I would say in general, we're looking for enough depth in the story and in the world and the character and everything that we usually want something that's 4,000 to 6,000. I think is about our normal range for most of our stories. Ed, do you have anything to add to it? You've got a lot more experience reading slush piles.
That this should be a character-centric story. As much as we're talking about the theme and fleshing out what exactly it means to have a magical artifact or craft or whatever it may be, it shouldn't be, hey, look at this cool way that I thought to make a magical thing. It really should be character-centric stories. I don't know that there's a whole lot more to say than that, but it shouldn't be a ooh, wow, cool thing. How does that cool thing impact the people that it comes in contact with? That's where the story should be.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. I call those idea stories.
Yeah.
And one of my common notes when I'm reading the slush is I get to the end of the story and I'll just put in my notes idea story, and like there's no story here. It's just an idea, and they haven't fleshed it out to make it a story yet, which usually means they're missing the whole character impact. Anything else along those lines?
I was just going to say the usual. I mean, we're not interested in, or at least I don't think we're interested in hardcore sexual content. I mean, all these stories are going to have some form of violence probably in them, but just
don't be graphic for the sake of being graphic. You will lose points for that.
Yeah. And
graphic anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, I would agree with that. Zombies doesn't really publish that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we should hit on. You guys have anything else you want to mention?
I'm excited to see what we get. But first things first, we got to fund this Kickstarter. So if
Amen.
you're watching this and you're interested in writing a story, we got to fund the Kickstarter.
No Kickstarter, no anthologies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this anthology is called Artifice Craft, and I do want to mention the anchor authors that we have for the anthology already. So obviously David and Ed are going to be the editors. We have I think seven anchor authors lined up already. So it's Alex Bledsoe, Julie Shernada, Alethea Contis, James Maxey, C.E. Murphy, Adam Stemple, and Catherine M. Valente. I probably mispronounced some of those names.
I don't think so.
Most of them I've only ever read online. I've never actually met. But those are the anchors. But the rest of the anthology is filled out with an open call for submissions. So that's the slush pile. And hopefully you have heard some good stuff here about how to focus your story and give it the best chance possible of getting into this anthology. So the Kickstarter, again, needs to be funded. Right now we're over halfway, but we still got a ways to go. So it's the Zombies Need Brains Kickstarter on Kickstarter. And if you want the URL, it's tinyurl.com/ZNB Kickstarter 2022. Okay, so the year 2022. So head to that URL, and we've got a ton of good reward levels, like signed books. David's got a whole bunch of signed books that you can grab in the Kickstarter. And like Ed, we've got early backer rewards from some of the anchors and some of the editors. So get in early and you'll get a lot of bonus books, basically. And then if we happen to hit our goal, then we've got a lot of stretch goals after that to reach for as well. So more bonus ebooks and stuff like that for backers. So check it out. Like they said, we can't produce the anthology and have an open call unless we hit our goal. So help us hit our goal. You can get all 4 anthologies for like $20 an ebook. And that's a pretty good deal, I think. And just so you know, the other 3 anthologies besides Artifice Craft, we talked about one earlier, Dragonesque. That one's supposed to be stories from the dragon's point of view. And then we have Solar Flare, which is supposed to be solar punk stories. Patricia Bray and I are editing that one. And then the 4th anthology is called Game On, and it's supposed to be stories centered around games, RPGs, video games, that kind of thing. There you have to be a little careful. You can't use anything that's licensed because we don't have the money to pay people to use their license. So don't use, World of Warcraft or something like that. You can't use that. But just games in general, but not sports. Okay, we should hopefully have a video where we chat with the editors on that. So watch for that coming up. So I want to thank David and Ed here for joining me to talk about the anthology. Any last thoughts to throw out at people?
I don't think so. This has been fun. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you. Fund this puppy. I really want to do this.
I really want to put it out there. Obviously I like doing anthologies. We've done 22 so far with zombies. So yeah. So if we get these 4 funded, then we'll have 26. So yeah, I like doing anthologies. So head on over to the Kickstarter, back us, and hopefully we'll reach our goal soon. The minute we reach our goal, we'll do the open call. So if we hit it early, then the open call will start early. Okay. Thank you guys, and thank everybody for listening in. Good luck if you submit something.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Catch you guys later.